All right. Well, welcome to the Wednesday Bible study. We're here again going over Matthew 24, the uh, a very well-known section. A lot of people understand this section, or at least people go through it and they think they understand it. And the church has had a fairly, uh, I would say, grasp of what this means. We go over it a lot. It ties out to, in many ways, the some of what we were covering in Daniel for the congregational study, as well as if you go through Revelation and the seven seals, it correlates with that. But it's very good to review this. I think it's very helpful to review this section here and it reminds us of the things, the order of things that go place. And there's a lot of warnings for us as we go through this. One, we just covered last week about not being deceived and about people who are coming in the name of Christ. And we talked through several examples in verse 4, from verse 4 about when Jesus said, take heed that no one deceives you. And we went through examples of history where people have been predictive of when Christ is going to return and putting dates on that. And when it didn't occur, it was a very disappointing, letdown. And Jesus Christ, it seems like Jesus Christ himself is being ignored because he says, no one knows the hour. No one, he keeps saying that point, no one knows the hour, and reemphasizes the being ready. We went through last time in verse 4, the warnings about not being deceived, and we've shown how that people can be really good, I guess, people that are all in sincerity, looking forward to Christ's return, and yet a leader, somebody thinks they know the time and the date and the hour, and then it doesn't come. And we've seen examples of that. And even now, I see somebody. I think for some reason in my YouTube feeds, I've been getting somebody that was associated with the Church of God back in the day and worldwide who's making predictive dates, predictive dates of Christ's return. I think he's done this before, and they don't come about. And I think that's very sad because it very clearly says, Jesus Christ says, no one knows the hour and day. Yet Jesus Christ does give us a series of events that occur up to show the order of what's going to occur as he gets close to the end of the age. Now remember, this whole section started with the disciples asking, what will be the end of the age and your coming? So he begins to go through that. All right, so with verse 4, uh, let's go on and show about, we ended where we gave examples of those who had set dates and were wrong and how that affected their followers as well as themselves to some degree. And then he goes on and says about no one deceiving you. So we have these warnings, these warnings about not being deceived by false teachers. So in 2 Peter 2, verse 1, let's just go through a couple of verses here, a couple of passages. 2 Peter 2, verse 1 and 3, it says, Peter writes, but there were also false prophets among the people. Now he's referring back to the time of Israel, even as there will be false teachers among you. So he talks about false teachers who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them. So he's making a clear point. There's people who have begun to be false teachers, and they even deny the Lord who bought them. So he kind of adds that to show an element of that they at one point maybe believed certain things correctly, but they changed their perspective. They've gone so far off track. But there's deceiving people. They're false teachers and bring on themselves swift destruction, and many will follow their destructive ways. So here we see Peter saying that there's some people who follow those who have destructive teachings and destructive ways, because of whom the way of the truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time, their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. So we here through Peter, we get a sense that there will be false teachers, people that are deceiving, and they're motivated by what? Covetousness. They want to follow, and there's something about the teachings that draw them to themselves, not to Jesus Christ. That's the key. All teachers should not be pointing to themselves, but point to God and Jesus Christ, God and not just to them, but also what they say, doing what they say. All right, Second Corinthians 11, verse 13 to 15, we have um, something from Paul, something very similar, where he says, "For such are false apostles." So he's using the word apostles. So they were apostles, true apostles appointed by Jesus Christ, but there are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. So these are people that are appearing to be apostles, but they're not, and they're not apostles. They appear to be apostles of Christ, but they're not. And he says, no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers, like ministers of Satan, servants of Satan, also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. So Paul makes a very interesting statement here that I think we've read this many times, but that Satan himself, who through, I guess, the way he's represented many times, we perceive him a certain way, but he's saying he can transform himself into an angel of light, like somebody who looks good, positive. And so can the ministers. So we have to be very careful when Jesus Christ says, be careful that you are not deceived. We have to be careful. That means we have to look at the fruits. Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount talked about looking at the fruits of those that are and what they produce. And I've always said, look and see, are they pointing to themselves or are they pointing to God, Jesus Christ, and what he taught in doing those things? Are the fruits there? So just what Jesus Christ is saying, he's saying, many will come and try to deceive you in his name. Be careful that doesn't happen. And we have to be very, very careful about that. All right, verse 5, he keeps going on this path. Let me just pause here in case there's any questions or comments on this section here. All right, verse 5, we're making progress. He goes on and says, for many will come in my name. So he's using, he's making the point, they're coming in my name, they're representing me, saying, I am the Christ and will deceive many. So here we go again. We have people who are coming in his name, but they're deceiving. And we've linked this, the Church of God, and we're not the only ones who have seen this, but we're primarily the ones that have seen this connection here, that the Church of God has seen that the first four seals in Revelation that are found in Revelation 6, verses 1 to 6, connect to Matthew 24, verses 4 through 7. And I've got this in a chart form here. And this first deception is those coming in saying, I am the Christ. And we see this in Revelation 6, where it says, where the seal is, look, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. And this is the white horse. And we've uh, labeled this as counterfeit religions. So just like Jesus Christ said, there's people who come out and have they use his name, but they're using it to deceive many. A counterfeit religion, you might say. And going, just to kind of, if you look at the chart or the table I have in the notes, we have the second seal, which relates to Matthew 24, verse 6, where it says, and you will hear of many wars and rumors of wars. And nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We see this next seal, the red horse, saying, when the Lamb, from Revelation 6, verse 3, when the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, come. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make peoples kill each other. To him was given a large sword. So we see a red horse likened to war, or a red horse that's associated with war. The third seal, there will be famines. And in Revelation 6, verse 5, it says, when the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand, Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wage, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wage, and do not damage the oil and the wine. So this is a black horse. We label this as famine, just like Jesus Christ says in Matthew 24, and there'll be famine. So it's a sequence of events that occur with these seals that occur when these things happen. And then the fourth thing Jesus Christ says is that there'll be pestilence. And we see in Revelation 6, verse 7, when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, Come, I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So this is a pale horse, and we've labeled this as one that where you have plagues. You know, the plagues or pestilence, disease that occur. So I think everybody's aware of this, but let me just make sure it's clear that these first four things that Jesus Christ mentions relate to the first four seals found in Revelation 6. Now, Revelation, if you want a summary of it, is really Jesus Christ, who's the only one worthy to open up seven seals. And there's seven seals. Now, within those seals are other things that we see at times, but there's really seven seals being opened up, and these are the first four seals. And then he goes on to the fifth, sixth, and seventh seal, where the seventh seal begins to get to return of Christ, where we have the trumpets. So there's a lot in Revelation. One of these days we may cover it, but we see here in Matthew 24, what Jesus Christ is going to say really correlates to the seals found in Revelation 6 and so forth. So I'll try to note that as we get to it. All right. Now, one of the things that people are mistaken by, and you see this in commentaries, often taught in some of the churches, not Church of God churches, but Protestant churches, is they make a mistake of saying that this first white horse in Revelation 6 is Jesus Christ. But that's not, when you look at it in detail and dig into it, that doesn't make any sense. Let me show you some things here that contrast the white horse in chapter 6 versus what we know for sure, chapter 19 in Revelation, of Jesus Christ coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. In chapter 6 Revelation, we see a bow in the hand. In chapter 19, we see Jesus Christ on a white horse, but he has a sword from his mouth. So he's not got a bow, he's got a sword. So we see a difference right there. There's some significance in that. But chapter 6, we also see a crown given him to the white horse, which means a position of power. In Revelation 19, the one that clearly shows Jesus Christ on a white horse, many crowns, meaning vast power. So this horse, representing false religion, does have a position of power represented by a crown, but it's not in the same way of the vast ultimate authority that Jesus Christ has shown in chapter 19 of Revelation with many crowns. Chapter 6, we see the white horse there representing again false religion, deceptive religion, bent on conquest, meaning control of others. You mean religion in a sense where you're trying to control others for a purpose of power. That's the horse, the white horse in chapter 6. In chapter 19, the white horse that clearly is Christ, we see judges, and judgment being taken, applying laws. So there's applying laws to his return, and he makes war. So he's got a different focus. Chapter 6, you see that this white horse is part of what's called the four terrible horsemen. Sometimes it's the horsemen of the apocalypse, but it's called the part of the four terrible horsemen. This white horse is. That doesn't make any sense to be applying that to Jesus Christ. But chapter 19, we see Christ on the white horse called faithful and true. So here we just see some very clear distinctions between the white horse in chapter 6 and the rider in chapter 19, represented by Jesus Christ. Two different descriptions and one is Jesus Christ and one is not. So when you see in commentaries or maybe even taught by some looking at Revelation 24, not in the Church of God, but outside the Church of God, sometimes they misunderstand what this white horse really is as false religion. And how ironic is that? The ones that are misunderstanding what the white horse is are teaching it wrong. So sort of an ironic aspect of that that they're unknowingly, I would say, deceiving people what the white horse actually means. And the white horse represents false religion. So that's sort of ironic in its own way. All right. Um, the white horse in Matthew 4, as we call it, is the first horse to ride, bringing false religion, as history has shown, which leads to war. So uh, many false religion, the purpose of false religion, the philosophy, the intent behind the false religion is oftentimes to control others, to dominate others, and we see this has happened many times. Uh, how many wars since the time of Jesus have been tied to religion as a reason for justifying a war? Well, we have this throughout history. You can probably think of many, but the big ones, Catholics versus Protestants. We have a lot of wars over history started over Catholics versus Protestants religion. You have the Crusaders and the Islamic Wars in history. You have many others with religious component to the war or conflict. We have Sunni and Shia in the Islamic world. You have Hindu and Islam. If you go to India and Pakistan, there's a lot of violence and wars just between the Hindus and those of the Islamic faith. So, and you have people within the Islamic faith, Sunni and Shia, and you can go on and on and on about false, deceptive religion as a cause of wars or because and which cause wars. All right. I mean, any comments with this? I'll just pause unless there's any pause for any additional comments or insights or thoughts on that. All right, just make sure everybody can hear me.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, good. All right. I do remember back in the day where I spoke for about 10 minutes and no one could hear me. And then that was challenging. All right. Verse 6. All right, we're going to continue on. Jesus Christ continues on this idea of war and rumors of wars. He says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So he's portraying this, that this is just sort of the way it's going to be for much of history. Nation, the word nation there is ethnos in Greek, which really means it's ethnic groups against other ethnic groups. And have we seen that? Yes, we have. We've seen that. We've seen just Rwanda, the genocide that wasn't that long ago, maybe a little over a decade or so, a couple, maybe longer than that. But, that's not too long ago in history. A Rwanda genocide involving Hutus and Tutsis, the two tribes. Just two tribes that had, they decided to decided to wipe the other one out over years of things that have happened in that country. Not too long ago, uh, well, it's starting to be a long time ago now, but the Croats and Serbs, they had, you know, living in the same area, but ethnos versus ethnos, two groups of people that are in many ways not dramatically different, but they see themselves as slightly different. And they had wars. They decided to have wars. Again, there could be an aspect of religion there as well. India and Pakistan, again, very subtle differences, but ethnos versus ethnos. These are people that see themselves as slightly different uh, when you get down to it, and they've had wars over the years. Iraq and Iran in the 80s. You see different ethnos that sort of different groups from certain families of that area against other families of that area over the years, and they've held on to these long-standing um, hatred, and they often go to war. And then there's also, as I've said, an aspect of religion in there as well. So you have religion with ethnos, nations fighting against nations. And then you have kingdoms against kingdoms. These are people who want regional hegemony. They want control of an area, dominance, and trade and military. And you see China right now. You see China. If you look at the geopolitical aspects or the political goals of China, really what they want is hegemony in their part of the world, which means they want to dominate and have full control over Asian neighbors. Now, who do they look at as example of how to do that? Uh, well, they look at the USA, right? The USA, through its Monroe Doctrine, says anything that happens in North America and South America, we control this area, and we have every right to interfere or insert ourselves in anything that starts to we see as a conflict in any of these areas that threaten our trade, our interest in those areas. We're going to have the right to go into it. Now, do we see that taking place right now? Yes, we do. We see the United States reasserting really what's the Monroe Doctrine, saying that anything that happens in this hemisphere, we have the right to go and address it. Well, China really wants the same thing in their part of the world. And who's the biggest problem with that? Well, United States. We've got allies called Japan, South Korea, and others, and they would love to have the same sort of regional hegemony, as I'll call it, in their area of the world. And so therefore we have what China and the United States sort of having a kingdom versus kingdom type of conflict right now. What do we see in Russia and the EU? We've had long-standing over time conflicts between Russia and European nations, and we see that today still playing out is what we see in the Ukrainian war in Russia. So we see these things taking place, kingdoms versus kingdoms against kingdoms that Jesus Christ talks about. And these will continue to go on, as he says. The end is not yet. It's just the way geopolitics works. And he's saying don't be surprised when you see these things happen. And when we see these things happen, we shouldn't be too surprised. He goes on and says, and there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. So just to kind of, see the linkage there, when we have war, it tends to bring famine and destroys farmlands and
24.
reduces down the numbers of farmers. So you've seen that massively in World War One, right? The whole area wherever they had the trench warfare, well, massive areas of farmland was destroyed. You saw it in World War II, where massive numbers of people in Europe would have starved because there wasn't any farmers, there wasn't suitable farmland. If United States and other countries wouldn't come in and really supplied food to those areas. So war brings famine. Famine brings what? Plagues and pestilence. When people are not eating, they're susceptible to disease and pestilence, and people die from that. So you have this sort of sequence of things that happen from wars, and then it leads to other really bad things, as Jesus Christ is saying. It's just sort of natural progression. Just for your notes or something of interest, the pale horse in Revelation 6, verse 7 and 8, which is relating to Jesus Christ, we've connected this to what Jesus Christ is saying, comes from the Greek word chloros, which is the origin of the word chlorine, which is a pale yellowish green color that reflects a sickly look. So we call it the pale horse, but oftentimes you see it pictured as a palish yellow horse. That's reflects sickness and illness and things like that. And then Jesus Christ says, all these are not the end of sorrows. These are just the beginning of sorrows. So these are not the end time events per se, but these horses have been really galloping across the world's landscape since Christ's first coming. What the world has experienced is just the normal life on this planet, uh, in wars and famines and things like that. Horrible things have happened. I have a link in my notes that you may want to look at some point, to see all the wars since 1900, just the 1900 wars. And there's a link there. And there's an amazing number of wars that have taken place just since 1900. Now, the weapons have become more destructive. The results of that have become more horrific. So, uh, back in the day, there used to be maybe, battles with swords and bows and arrows, and there'd be maybe a limited number of people killed. But now we have, bombs and tanks and horrible weapons that can destroy and kill massive amounts of people. We saw some of that come about in World War One, with gas warfare and things like that that began to get developed, and bombs that were never existed before being developed, air war through airfare, or planes being developed. Boy, I've got a problem. Planes being developed to cause another set of ways to destroy your enemy. And obviously, it's gotten even, World War II, and now we're into the nuclear warfare and all sorts of weapons that have been developed that can create massive destruction very easily. So these are the things that are Jesus Christ were to come, and they have come, and they still are in different places and different times still going on. So these are just the beginning, meaning that as time comes closer to Christ's return, they will get worse. They will get worse. All right. In the next section, and I'll pause here a minute, but in the next section, Jesus describes escalating sorrows, especially for God's people. But before that, let me just see if there's any comments on that section, about describes the war and battles and the things that come from warfare and life.
Well, I was just thinking about but the end is not yet.
Yeah.
And the why is that the end is not yet. It's because we understand what God is doing, what His plan is. It's clear that the end is not yet because He wants people to make the choices. The consequences of what's going to happen can only happen consistently when they've made the choice, and so their choices have to come to fruition, and the results of their choices have to come to its fullest extent. But what's interesting is how it accelerates towards the end consequence. When back in the day, when it was hand-to-hand combat, whether it was with battle axes or even with bows and arrows and spears, it was still one man against one man, or a couple at a time. But once the mechanization, like from World War One, began, there's a distance that's put between the action and the consequences. So they can kill, one person can kill or slaughter many people with the right tool, and there's the consequences of that are distancing the action from the consequences. And we see that in traffic, just on a personal level. Each of us, we are in traffic, and we can see all around us what's going on, and the aggressions. And people are looking at the traffic. They're looking at the machines. They're looking at the cars and the trucks and the buses and everything that's in their way. And it's easy to get upset. And we see this phenomenon called road rage. And people are angry at the car that cut them off, but there's a person driving that car. And the moment there's eye contact, the reality of a human being being involved in this is a sobering thought in the moment. So it's just like you can, with the bombs and the technologies that are available, it can just it's a little easier to push a button or pull a trigger or send a mechanical device or a drone to take care of the ugliness of humans' slaughter and suffering that come from it. So the distancing is a part of what we're seeing developing before our very eyes.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a part of people don't see the results of their actions, and I think that's a good point. People are pushing a button, you might say, and not seeing the destruction that results from that decision. So it makes a little, you can separate yourself from what really happens. So yeah, interesting comment. And we certainly with our weapons today have that. War, I think for those who went to war, got to see the results back in the day with swords and things like that. They got to see the very real result of what war meant, death. Now people can be removed from it to some degree. All right, interesting. Anyway, well, interesting what Jesus Christ says and see where we're at now, and seeing
I
that.
have another comment too. We talk also, I agree with what John said and what you're saying, but there's another aspect to it. There's this insidiousness that happens after the result, like we've had with Agent Orange and radiation that, places are uninhabited for long periods of time. Sometimes there's the long-term results that people don't realize until much later after the fact. So even though they're detached from the actual, like not doing swords and that type of thing, but still there's consequences that get paid later that they're unaware of at the time.
Yep, that's for sure. Definitely. And that would kind of lead into a little bit that there's famine and pestilence. Like there's things that where things that are destroyed or there's long-term effects from war. And then we see that in many different ways. Just not Agent Orange type things, chemicals, but just the effects on a person who experiences those things. We have, I see commercials and things really asking for help to support those who have come back from different wars who are experiencing maybe not just the loss of a limb or something to that effect, which is very sad, but also the way that impacts their families, but also the emotional PTSD, as they call it, effects of war, and how that some people never, ever, ever really get over that. I think Mr. Christensen actually has talked about that several times from his experience in Vietnam. There's those that he knew who never got over what they experienced, what they saw, what happened to them or their friends, and it just never. It changes the whole life. It changes the family. It changes the direction. It changes the long-term effects of that. Is just can be quantified. Can be quantified. So it's just horrible things. You're right about that.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going here and let's see. We got 10 minutes, so we'll see if we can get through a few sections here, a few verses. Then Jesus Christ goes on and tells his disciples that then, so we've got wars, but then we're going into what we understood to be the next seal from Revelation, the fifth seal. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation. Again, he's talking to the disciples, those that are following him, disciples of Christ. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And then says, verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end, this is what we're talking about, the end will come. So we see that in verse 14. So let's just go back a little bit to where we started at in this section here of the fifth seal. We can go back to the fifth seal in Revelation and read of a seal being opened that reflects those who have been slain for the word of God and the testimony they held of Jesus Christ and being faithful to Christ and God and his teachings, their teachings. Now we see this now. So in Revelation 6, verse 9 to 11, the fifth seal. So verse 9 says, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So we see here a representation, a symbolic, this represents a symbolic outcry, you might say, of those who have died for being faithful and have given their life for their commitment to God. So we sort of see a symbolic sense that they're sort of seen in this sort of symbolic way of crying out, how much longer? And the answer is, well, for a little while longer, until some fellow servants are numbered with them, for the same reason, for holding true to the word of God, for the belief, to being a testimony, because it says they're slain for the word of God and for their testimony. So we have some servants, some brethren, some people represented here who are, in a sense, martyrs for their faith and belief and testimony in following God in all areas, obedience to him and the truthful word of God. They're not deceived into something else, but the truthful word of God, and they've not compromised, they've not changed their beliefs, they've held on to it, even in the face of death and experiencing death. So Jesus Christ says, he says it corresponds to what he says is going to happen about they'll deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. So there's some disciples that will have experienced that and will experience that. And if we read that even more so at some point at the end time, near the end time. All right, verse 12. And he says, and because, so he sort of gives a link here, because lawlessness will abound, love of many will grow cold. So as Jesus will reference later in the chapter, the days of Noah, he references like the days of Noah in verse 37, which was a time of wickedness of man, and it was very great on the earth, that every intent, that's the way it's described at the time of Noah, every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So we see a time similar here being described in that every intent, every thought, every motivation was based on evil continually, as it was in the days of Noah, which we'll hear about later on. That was the way the days of Noah were described before the flood came. So we get to a point where it's very bad, lawlessness is very bad, and that, of course, causes love to grow cold. The NLT, sometimes the newer translations are helpful at times. In this case, it says, sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. Something we should always understand, I think we do, law, law and love are connected. And the lack of law or lawlessness results in lack of love. Sort of simple thing. But when you start doing away with God's laws, and even in man's laws, which oftentimes are based on, certain moral code that can be associated with God's law, when that's done away with, you see society begin to really deteriorate in the way they think of other humans. And the human aspect, the value of human life is eroded to the point that, they don't have love for others. In 2 Timothy, we have the situation described by Paul at the last days. In 2 Timothy 3, verse 1 through 5, he writes, but know this, so he wants us to know this, that in the last days, so we're talking about the last days, perilous times will come. And what will be perilous about them? Well, he says, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, right, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. So that's quite the list. It's a very long list of things of how Paul describes the last days. But today,
Pearls on the roof.
we see political groups, right? People all around the world, even in our own country, political groups that can justify, in their own words or for their own reasons, an anti-law agenda. And interestingly, they typically also support and promote sin, what we call sin, and actions that show a lack of love or love growing cold. And you see that, right? You see a segment of society who is anti-law, and yet they also represent, in many cases, very abominations, really, of humankind. In many ways, they support that. You just look at and how they look and promote certain sins, way far away from anything that God says in His Bible. And then they also have the ability to be very violent towards others, especially those who they disagree with them or try to resist their agenda. They justify violence in that way. And we see that more and more showing up. And it's becoming almost as though what was shocking, they made a very interesting, one of the commentators made a very interesting comment. I don't know if you saw, we're watching politics, and I try not to get too involved in politics in the messages, but you saw a attorney general who had in Virginia running for attorney general, and he won. He's a Democrat, and said he, at some point not too long ago, texted that he wanted his a political enemy, you might say, killed, and also his children killed. And more and more people didn't disavow themselves from that comment. And you see that more and more, that violent rhetoric is not condemned, and it leads to justification for the reasons why someone can kill somebody else in the political sphere. And we see that happening today. Things that were happening today that would not happen 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are happening today. And we see a mindset change of what's acceptable. People didn't condemn this. In fact, the guy won. People voted for him. And he had a very, very violent post, very violent text, and it was sort of glossed over, or, oh, he didn't really mean that, but it was a very harsh text. So we see the seeds, seeds, and maybe the small plants growing, where we see this situation, seeing this today in our own society, where there's lawlessness, the justification for lawlessness, and therefore also a attitude of that violence toward their enemies, just for disagreeing with them, is not something that they're afraid of doing. All right, it's 10:46. Maybe we'll pause there, verse 13, on a very important scripture. Maybe we'll just say it right now. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. So that's our reoccurring theme for us. We who endure to the end will be saved. So we'll end on that. We'll cover it more next time. But any more questions or thoughts on what was said in this section in the study?
I was thinking that just as because of lawlessness, because of iniquity, there is a loss of love one for another. Um, and of course, you can also see with that flow of thought that the reverse is true. Where there is no love, there must be lawlessness going on in the background. So I'm thinking that that is that the lack of love is the fruit or the consequence of lawlessness. So when you see an absence of it, then it's probably a reasonable thought to pursue the thinking of what kind of lawlessness could be going on in the background. So, but what's also interesting is that we have the opportunity. God's made it clear to us that we can show love, we can demonstrate love to not just one another, but to all of the people that Christ died for, which is all of the people, and that we can do that with our tithes and offerings as that financing of the work continues. So we can consider that as an act of love as we tithe and make offering.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Love and lawlessness go hand in hand, or lack of love and lawlessness go hand in hand. And you see one, you'll see the other.
Hmm.